Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great, as I always say, and welcome back to the channel. In this video, I have a lot of stories, crazy ones obviously, all from Europe. So, if that sounds like something that interests you, definitely pull up a stump with me, and let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. I don't know what to make of this, and I'm sure that it wasn't just us freaking ourselves out. The experience was in early autumn, so the leaves were still mostly on the trees, as me and my friend entered the woods. We usually would go on longer hiking trips once or twice a year, and this happened in eastern Germany, right on the border to Czechia. So we parked the car near some village really far off in the middle of nowhere. We get our backpacks and we start to hike up the trail into the woods. We usually just head in one direction, straight through the terrain and avoiding paths, as we like to enjoy the silence and the peaceful nature of hiking. The trail ends at a pond, the kinds where anglers used to hang around. From there on, we just went straight into the woods in the general direction of the Czech Republic. We talk a little bit about our daily stuff, updating each other on what's currently going on in our lives. He asked me, "Did you pack a lighter?" Wait, I searched for it in my backpack, pretty sure that I took it with me. After a bit of hasty searching, I found it. It would have been pretty nasty if I didn't bring it, as we had planned to stay overnight and hike back in a wider arc. Eventually, everything gets dark and we look for a place to set up camp. We see this large rock formation with an overhang that's angled against a slope or plateau. A small vein of water is running into a bunch of bushes a bit further down. So we place our stuff where we figure it should go, and we clear space out for a fire, and we damp the ground around it a bit too. The leaves and stuff were pretty dry, and we weren't keen on having a forest fire on our hands. So fast forward, we went looking for firewood and some rocks to surround the fire on a small hill behind the cliff. We end up about 400 meters away from camp, picking up branches and 2 rocks. We notice a bunch of long, thick branches stacked around a pretty high oak tree, like a teepee, and 2 circles carved into the ground around it. I say, this is a little weird, but we think maybe it could have been some kids playing and building tents that were maybe camping nearby at some point. But as we were a day's hike deep into the forest, it seemed unlikely. We stand there for a few minutes thinking of what it could be. After a few minutes of debating back and forth maybe what it could have been, we decide that it's probably nothing, and that maybe we're just closer to another campsite than we thought we were. We go back to our place for the night. When we arrive back at camp, it's pretty damn near dark now. We light a fire and put a can of soup onto a rock beside it. We eat and eventually climb into our sleeping bags that are tucked under the overhang. It's pretty cozy and quite dry too. I fell asleep pretty quickly as I was exhausted from the hike. I wake up pretty early in the morning, still dark. I hear something down toward the water. I assume it's just wild pigs. I never had a bad encounter with a boar, but I stayed cautious because I didn't want to have a bad one. I just laid there, waiting for the sun to rise. Eventually, some sunlight starts passing through the leaves, and my friend wakes up too. "You hear that?" I ask him. He says, "Yeah, but it's probably some deers or boar or something. But it's not too close, right?" I say, "Nah, but I'm honestly still cautious, but I try to chuck it off as just wild pigs too." My friend starts making pig noises. I laugh and grunt too, and we start packing our stuff up. For the next few minutes, I think to myself like, oh, I was probably just a little spooked about the whole teepee thing, maybe I was overreacting, right? Well, Suddenly, this high-pitched whistling scream cuts through the air, and my friend says, "Yo, what the hell was that?" I shrug. I had no clue. We sit still, but continue to quietly stuff our sleeping bags into those far too tight bags that hold them. There's another high-pitched whatever it was. We continue slowly, wondering what the hell this is. All of a sudden, my friend looks at me, telling me to shush. I stop what I'm doing. We hear heavy, muffled steps right above the rocks. I mouth the words, "What the hell," to my friend. We can hear sore breathing and some grunting sounds that I can't describe. Whatever this is, it's no pig. The walking sounds human almost. You could hear one foot being placed after the other. A third scream, deeper in pitch than the last ones, almost as if it was in pain. I realize it's right above us on the overhang. It's very much like that scene from Lord of the Rings where the hobbits are hiding under the root. We're both tucked under this rock overhang. To get down from the rock, whatever it was must have taken a way around. The steps seem to head away from us. After 3 minutes of no motion, we throw all of our stuff quickly into the backpacks and decide to backtrack. We walk really fast, backtracking into the general direction we came from. After 4 hours of paranoid running through the bushes, we reach the broad trail. We stand there for a minute, catching our breath. My friend says, "You know, maybe we were a little paranoid. It could have been a hurt animal." Then, just as soon as those words leave his mouth, we hear another scream. Then, a second from a totally different direction. I audibly say, "Oh crap." We start running again, but we're too tired. We can't keep this up. The running turns into a fast walk after about 20 minutes. There's 3 more of these screams as we pass by the pond. I think, oh crap, are we being hunted now? We eventually reach the car in the village before whatever these things are catch up to us. But as we're getting in the car, we see birds flying off loudly 70 meters into the woods. As we're sitting there, we wait to see what happens. And then we see something, just a glimpse, not like other people's encounters where they see a full body. We just see this figure in the tree line, a very tall shape, kinda tucked behind a tree, looking at us. I say, "Dude, drive, please." As we drive off, we hear 6 screams behind us. The thing does not chase us. It must know that it can't get us in a car. Eventually, we get on the freeway and we head home. I still don't know what to make of it, any of it. I don't know what it could have been. I still go hiking, and none of this has ever happened. I have no clue. I live in Poland, and I must say that those bunkers from World War II are effing scary. I live very close to the German border, and my house is located on top of one of these bunkers. Supposedly, it's buried under the ground very deep down so that anything that happened down there wouldn't affect the surface. The entrance was buried a long time ago, obviously, so no one can get inside or outside. And I moved here 13 years ago, and all of our neighbors were about 60 to 70 years old back then, and they lived there all their lives. I remember that one of them kept telling us that weird things were coming out of the ground. Lots of brightly colored and weird-looking snakes and other weird-looking animals. There's no other way I can explain it. And this is in the middle of a small city, and rats that seem almost too big, I guess. I always hated living here. When I was little, I would constantly think of these things, and I refused to sleep alone. My former dog would always bark at the wall in one bedroom. The smaller dog has random panic attacks and hides under my desk and refuses to get out. I'm sure that something has grabbed my foot once in bed too. But when I said before that a lot of old people lived here, they also died here. I remember one such case, that one night, all the paintings on the walls got knocked down suddenly. My mom told me it was nothing, but 5 minutes later, there was a bunch of ambulances, and then we found out that 3 of our neighbors had died. So while researching for this video, I came across an article from Reuters from 2016 titled "Mystery Magic Spells Unearthed with Ancient Skeletons in Serbia." It says, archaeologists are trying to decipher magic spells etched onto tiny rolls of gold and silver that they found alongside skeletons of humans buried almost 2,000 years ago. Miomir Korak, the chief archaeologist at the site in eastern Serbia, says, "The alphabet is Greek, that much we know, but the language is Aramaic. It's a Middle Eastern mystery to us." It goes on to say that the skeletons were found at the foot of a massive coal-fired power plant, where searches and excavations were being carried out before another unit of the plant was built, and this is on the site of an ancient Roman city. They found 2 lead amulets that, when opened, were small scrolls of precious metal, like I said, silver and gold, that were covered in symbols, and they're the size of a small sweet wrapper. Then it says, "We read the names of a few demons that are connected to the territory of modern-day Syria," archaeologist Ilya Dankovic said. Dankovic continued on that there were other items discovered at the site that were binding magic. They would leave love charms, ordering someone to fall in love, but there were also dark and malignant curses to the tune of, "May your body turn dead, as cold and heavy as this lead amulet." I thought this was interesting because it starts off exactly like you would see in a horror movie. Like, they find scrolls, or in this case, little scrolls of precious metals that just have the binding runes and names of demons on them. When I read this, I was like, oh, this is going to end up great for us all, you know. Anyways, I just thought this was super interesting, and that's something that I wanted to share. So the link to the article will be in the description. That's probably at the very top. I'm from Serbia, and here are some creepy things, I guess, from my country. These are a couple stories, some first-hand accounts, and just things that I know. First off, always bury your dead, unless you want them to come back and haunt you, and just in case, give them their last rites, and if necessary, a baptism. If you can't, set the body on fire. And remember, there's always worse stuff in the woods and in the waters, especially the water, since the old Slav underworld was underwater, which is why you have a ton of scary stuff come from out of the water, and almost all of it wants to murder your ass. Vestica, or Vestus, a plural, translates as witches. Nobody bothered to give them a proper or unique name, because everyone more than usually just stays the hell away from those things. Think Baba Yaga, that's what those things are. All of them have their own houses in the middle of nowhere. All of them live alone. All of them loathe people coming near them. And all of them are ancient, and still somehow in better shape than you. They never run out of wood and supplies needed for survival, even though you've never seen them buying anything or doing any farm work. People used to leave them gifts to appease them. Sometimes they'll even offer advice if they're in a good mood, or heal the sick. Probably the scariest part is that apparently anyone who reaches an old age and lives through some serious stuff can become one of them. And if you live in Vlach country like I do, They can do magic, so they don't even have to be near you to F your stuff up. All they need is a piece of string or a piece of your hair, and the moment they tie a knot into it, you're dead. The place I grew up in actually had a story about the local witch. But first, some information about the place. This region is old, ancient. One of the oldest Mesolithic settlements in Europe was found here. It was found in a gorge made by the Danube River. The place was swept under the waves. Then the Romans came. They declared the place the edge of their empire and built a huge bridge and a fortress there to defend against invaders. The bridge was also swept under the waves. Then the Turks came and built a fortress there. Part of the fortress was swept away, and their graveyard ended up underwater. When the Second World War ended, the communists found several struggling villages in the gorge and decided to flood them in order to build a nearby dam. The waters are so treacherous that the ship captains dreaded going through the gorge if they didn't have a local with them. And because of how ridiculous the weather is, whenever there's rain or snow, there are landslides and floods everywhere. About a year or two ago, a massive landslide wrecked an entire town and laid bare a graveyard that no one knew was even there. And people report, almost every year, strange things that gets dug up by the flood. Sometimes it's as simple as dead cows, dead farm animals. But then you'll get monuments to Lord knows what. They don't really seem to fit in the area. They had to stop a hydroplant turbine one time because something was clogging it, and I went in the woods with a few friends after a huge landslide, and we saw some weird sticks sticking out of the mud. We later realized that these were not sticks. They were the tops of full-grown trees that had been buried under the mud. You can see the pattern here. And of course, there are whirlpools everywhere. These tie in with the story that I'm about to tell, because according to the local legends, the whirlpools are actually devils, water devils, because they were everywhere. The locals told their kids to stay away from the water, or at least not go deep. Each year, there are a couple drowned kids, which usually they are drunk tourists who decide to go swimming during the night, but occasionally you do end up with a drowned local fisherman. Anyways, on to the story. After World War II, the whole region was in absolute ruins. It was the place where the Russians had crossed the border, so of course there was carnage everywhere. The local families fled for their lives ages ago, and were now coming back to what little remained of their homes. One of those families returns and finds that their grandma was still there, alive and kicking, and she was angry. She'd told them to start working on the land because she was tired from burying the dead with her own two hands. The family obliges because there's something that's clearly different about Grandma since the last time they saw her. For starters, she isn't dead. Time passes, and Granny still refuses to die. The family starts thinking about what to do in the future, and the Granny suggests/orders that they'll open a butcher shop. They ask, where are we going to get the meat? She tells them not to worry about it, and comes back later that day with a slaughtered cow, and so on and so on. Meanwhile, stories start popping up about whirlpools popping up out of nowhere, sudden drownings, monster sightings in the waters. And each time that someone notices something missing, Grandma turns up the next day with fresh meat. So her grandson and his best friend, they were just children at the time, decide to investigate these rumors. They follow the grandma to the river, where she strips naked and starts chanting. Then, this stench hits them, rotten, wet, and out of the waters, a humanoid figure emerges, a frog-like head on top of a human-like body, pale green skin, huge, bulbous eyes, rows upon rows of teeth. The Vlachs call it the water devil. The South Slavs call it the vodnik. You've probably heard it being called the vodianoi. Grandma demands more meat, and the creature tells her in a gurgle how the deal is off, she was followed, and it wants those who followed her. The two kids start running away, with Grandma chasing after them. Her skin changes. It looks like the consistency of tree bark. Her eyes huge and bloodshot. Her limbs are twice the size they were before. She's screaming at them in some ungodly tongue, the works. She grabs her grandson and realizes who spied on her. Apparently family ties are still important to these hags, and she lets him go. The kid returns home, terrified, and his grandma is sitting there, waiting for him. The family business is now over because of him. She can no longer provide offerings to get fresh food for them. They have to move on to the next town and start over. And now, everything in the water is after them, and because Grandma told them to get the hell away from it, they can't say no. So far, the family with the witch is still around. They still run a butcher shop, and they're terrified of stepping near the waters because they have an impressive death by drowning ratio. And that's the story about the local hag. This next one happened to my friend. His father snapped during the war in the 90s. He came back and brought guns with him, including grenades. He was generally the scariest guy around. You always had this feeling of him being exactly one word away from getting his guns and just going after you. His family was terrified of him. He'd storm into their apartments. They lived separated, since the guy was a notorious drunk well before he was drafted. In his military fatigues, he would show up, start waving his gun around, and demanded answers like, "Who are you effing now? Where are my kids? Are my kids eating well?" and stuff like that, just screaming it. You get the idea. This guy was also convinced that he saw something out there during the war. We all think that this is what caused him to snap, but who knows? Maybe it's just stress and shell shock from the war. But he swears on his dying breath that he saw something take the corpses of the fallen soldiers into the water. He opened fire at them. This only made them angrier. The other soldiers in his squad apparently saw them too. They heard them screaming in the middle of the night. Sometimes they'd imitate other people, yelling for help, or lament loudly in the old language. This man died a couple years ago, in a flood, again, and the guy was caught outside of the city when the water reached him. Apparently, he had a total panic attack, total breakdown, started screaming about seeing them in the water and how they came back for him. He ran out of the car with a heavy chain. Apparently, he and his friends were out salvaging stuff from the nearby ditches, and he tied himself to a tree. The people who were with him tried to help him, but the water was too strong. Some guy even ended up with a broken foot because something broke it. He said it felt like that something grabbed it and snapped it in two and almost crushed his leg. They had to leave him there, screaming at the water, tied up with chains. They came later for him, but he was gone. All that remained was a bloody chain and a huge pile of rocks that the water had dragged along. His body was never found. So, what'd you think of those? Let me know which one was your favorite one down in the comments. Do you have one of your own? I have an email in the description below that you can send them to if you'd like to. Down there as well as a PayPal and a Patreon if you would like to support the channel that way. And If you notice my voice being higher or lower in volume, it's because I have not recovered from the cold I had 3 weeks ago. I am now recovering, but I swear it's been the worst flu of my entire effing life. So, if my voice sounds a little different in this one and the ones prior, that's why, because I was secretly dying. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you're staying hydrated and I guess moisturized. That's the word that popped into my head. So we're going to go with that. Hydrated and moisturized and having a good week. And with that, I will see you in the next one. Thank you for pulling up a stump, and thank you for watching.